I'm Evelyn Brooks, 30 years old, and in the Brooks family, I've always been the chair left empty. At every gathering, my father Richard raised glasses for Victoria, my sister, his heir. My mother Madeline smiled politely, rehearsed, always on Victoria's side. And me? I was tolerated only as decoration, the invisible one, the one whose silence filled their comfort. But the breaking point came when my father declared at dinner, "The Brooks legacy will pass where it belongs." He looked at Victoria with pride and at me with disdain. Victoria's smirk followed, her words dripping poison. "That dress looks like something from a clearance bin." Their laughter cut sharper than any blade. In that moment I vowed, my silence would no longer shield me. It would become my weapon. Ever been erased in your own family? Hit like if someone's ever mocked your worth. Comment if you've ever been the invisible one. It all began that night at the Brooks table, when my father's laughter tried to erase me. I had grown used to the sight of it, gleaming mahogany polished so perfectly that the chandelier's glow slid across it like water. Tonight was no different. The long dining table glittered with silver cutlery and crystal glasses, each place setting prepared with ritual precision. At the head sat my father, Richard Brooks, the patriarch who ruled this mansion in Connecticut with the same iron will he used to run his company. My mother, Madeline, perched beside him in her silk dress, her posture so rigid that even her smile seemed rehearsed. Across from her lounged Victoria, my sister, draped in designer satin, every gesture a performance meant to remind me that I did not belong. I eased into the vacant chair, though no one invited me. The scrape of the chair legs against the marble floor sounded louder than it should have, and silence followed, thin as glass. For years I had been the ghost in these rooms, present in blood, absent in spirit. They never needed to tell me outright that I was unwelcome. The looks did the work. Conversation soon resumed, deliberate in excluding me. My father spoke of quarterly profits, his voice booming with the satisfaction of a man who believed himself infallible. Victoria leaned in, asking about the expansion into Europe, her tone silky, eyes darting at me only to savor my absence from the dialogue. My mother lifted her wine glass, nodding at their words, lips pressed in that same thin smile she reserved for strangers and inconveniences. No one asked how I had been. No one cared. I watched the golden light shimmer on their glasses, the roasted lamb carved with elegance, the laughter swelling whenever the subject circled back to Victoria's achievements. When my fork clinked against my plate, it felt like an intrusion. Then came the inevitable. My father's voice cut through the chatter, heavy with disdain. "The Brooks legacy will pass where it belongs, to those who know how to manage it." His eyes slid to Victoria, who straightened proudly, then lingered on me with a coldness that almost amused me. He never missed a chance to wound. Victoria smirked, lowering her gaze to the hem of my dress. "You could have at least tried, Evelyn. That fabric looks like something from a clearance bin. Did you pick it up on your way here?" Her words floated across the table, smooth as poison. My mother's lips twitched in silent approval. Heat rose in my cheeks, but I refused to grant her satisfaction. I touched the fabric lightly, letting the insult hang in the air, unacknowledged. Years ago, I might have left the room, trembling, humiliated. Not tonight. My father chuckled, low and cruel. "You'll never manage even a meal. Leave alone Brooks' legacy." His fork clattered down, final as a gavel. The table laughed with him, Victoria's cackle sharp, my mother's sigh a quiet note of agreement. I set my wineglass down carefully, letting the stem kiss the tablecloth. My reflection shimmered in its crimson depths, steady, unbroken. A smile curved across my lips, faint but undeniable, cutting through the weight of their scorn. They have no idea how far I've come. They remembered each other's birthdays, but mine passed like it never existed. The small cafe on the corner of Lexington was nearly empty, its windows fogged by the drizzle outside. I sat at a table for one, the candlelight flickering against the polished surface, the single flame bent as if it, too, were weary of standing alone. In front of me sat a cupcake, its icing uneven, the paper wrapper crinkled. No balloons, no music, no laughter, just the hum of the espresso machine and the clatter of a barista rinsing cups. I had bought the cupcake myself, if only to mark the day I was born into a family that never celebrated me. This wasn't the first year my birthday had gone unnoticed. I remembered the endless cycle of other celebrations. Victoria's milestone parties with champagne fountains, my father's retirement galas with orchestras, my mother's charity luncheons dripping with diamonds. For me, there had only ever been silence. As a child, I once waited in the parlor, believing they had planned a surprise. Midnight came, and with it the realization that some people would rather you didn't exist. That lesson had hardened into scar tissue, but scars ache on anniversaries. I pulled out my phone, hoping distraction might dull the sting. It betrayed me instantly. Social media burst to life with glossy photographs. Victoria in a sequined gown, holding a flute of champagne, her caption announcing another year, another victory. Around her, the Brooks clan glowed beneath chandeliers, each smile choreographed for the camera. Hashtags bloomed under the images number Brooks Empire, number family first, each one a thorn pressed deeper into my chest. I scrolled until my hand trembled, then shut the screen as if slamming a door. The barista set down a refill of coffee beside me. He didn't know it was my birthday. No one here did. I struck a match and lit the candle, the flame small but defiant. I leaned closer, whispering to it, as though a secret could make up for the absence of voices singing my name. The candle wavered, stubbornly clinging to life until a draft from the door snuffed it out. Smoke curled upward, fading as quickly as the years I had lost in silence. A new notification pinged. My heart lurched not out of hope, but habit. I opened the email and froze. A reservation confirmation. Victoria had booked a table at Le Marché, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants. A party of 12, the email read. Name under Victoria Brooks. 12 chairs. One for each of them, none for me. I stared at the glowing screen until the letters blurred. My lips curved into something between sorrow and defiance. If they won't remember my birthday, I'll make them remember this one. The whisper surprised even me, its quiet conviction louder than any toast raised in my absence. I scrolled down, thumb hovering over the link at the bottom of the email, confirm your attendance. A breath left my chest, slow, steady. The weight of every forgotten year pressed into my finger as it tapped the screen. In that moment, the silence around me transformed. It was no longer loneliness. It was a challenge. And I had just accepted it. Evelyn accepts the silent challenge by confirming her attendance. Before they called me poor, they made sure I had nothing left. The memory came to me as I stared into the rain-washed glass of my apartment window that night, the droplets streaking downward like years I could never get back. I had been younger then, eager, naive, still believing that family and love might save me. The Brooks mansion had smelled of cedar and wealth, its long corridors echoing with the clatter of shoes I could never fill. I remember standing in my father's study, my heart pounding with a dream I had nurtured for months, to start something of my own, to prove that the Brooks name did not define me, that I could create a legacy without theirs. Richard Brooks didn't even look up from his glass of bourbon. Ungrateful, he muttered, as though the word were a stain he needed to scrub off the family crest. My mother stood behind him, arms crossed, face unreadable. She neither defended me nor condemned me. Silence, her greatest weapon, pressed against me harder than any insult. It wasn't only my family who turned away. At the university, I clung to Jason Miller, the boy who had once sworn he saw a future in my eyes. We had walked together across the campus quad, leaves tumbling around us like confetti. That day, his words sliced the air clean. I can't be with someone who has no future, Evelyn. He didn't flinch when he said it. He didn't soften. His hand slid from mine with practiced ease, as if it had always been temporary. The other students passed us without pause, the autumn wind carrying my humiliation down every path I had once believed would lead me forward. The final blow came by email. A sterile subject line. Amendment to will. I opened it in the quiet of my dorm room, fluorescent light buzzing overhead, the text blurring as I read it again and again. I was removed, officially, by name. No inheritance, no place at the table. Richard's words in Chapter 1 of my life, "You'll never manage even a meal," were now enshrined in legal language. I remember sitting there, laptop screen burning into my eyes, my chest hollowing out. When I returned to the mansion to collect my belongings, the staff avoided me, their eyes sliding past as though my existence endangered theirs. I carried boxes down the staircase, each step heavy, each creak of the banister a reminder that I was being stripped of not just wealth, but belonging. At the final step, I looked up. My mother stood at the landing, elegant as ever, pearls resting against her collarbone. She said nothing. She didn't move. She simply watched me leave, her silence more permanent than any lock they could have placed on the doors. I loaded the last of my things into the back of a second-hand car, the mansion's windows gleaming above me, cold and indifferent. For a moment, the weight of everything crushed me: the loss of Jason, the rejection of my father, the indifference of my mother. They thought they had erased me from their story, that without them, I was nothing but a shadow fading into the margins. But as the gate swung shut behind me and the road opened ahead, I felt something unexpected. Not ruin, freedom. They thought they erased me. In truth, they freed me. I rebuilt my life in a rented room with peeling paint and nothing but grit. The plaster walls flaked like old parchment, dust sprinkling across my thin mattress each morning. The single window rattled whenever the subway roared beneath the street. I kept my shoes tucked under the bed to avoid the leaking radiator, and every night I reminded myself that empire building doesn't begin with gold but with bare hands and calluses. My father's voice lingered like a ghost in those early days, his certainty that I would never manage even a meal. Perhaps that was why I clung to the idea of food. If I could turn one plate into sustenance, then maybe, just maybe, I could turn it into a future. So I worked. 3 jobs stacked on top of each other, a schedule stitched together with exhaustion. Mornings began at the farmer's market, where I hauled crates of vegetables from trucks that smelled of earth and gasoline. I asked too many questions of the vendors about soil, about taste, about what made a tomato richer in flavor than another. Afternoons were swallowed by shifts at a deli, slicing meat so thin it seemed to dissolve on the blade. Nights ended in the kitchen of a cafe where grease clung to my hair, and the clatter of pans drowned out my own heartbeat. When I dragged myself back to the rented room, my clothes stiff with sweat, I wrote recipes in a spiral notebook, each page filled with scratches of hope. People laughed when I talked about farm-to-table dining. "Nobody wants rustic carrots in Manhattan," one manager sneered. Another dismissed me outright. "Leave the food revolutions to men with real capital." I smiled through it all, the ridicule pressing against my ribs like a weight, but I refused to drop the burden. I told myself every jeer was a brick, and I would stack those bricks into the foundation of something they couldn't imagine. One evening, under the hum of string lights in a converted barn, everything shifted. The long tables were crowded with dishes I had coaxed from farmers' scraps: roasted squash with herbs, bread still warm from the oven, salads jeweled with late summer fruit. I spoke not of profit margins but of memory, the taste of food that told a story. Across from me sat an investor. His fork paused midair, his eyes sharper than I expected. When he leaned forward, placing his card on the table, I felt the weight of possibility slide across the wood. "You've got something here," he said. My hands trembled as I accepted it. The barn smelled of hay and ambition, and for the first time since exile, I saw a door open. Days later, an envelope arrived at my apartment, its gold-trimmed edge absurd against the peeling paint of my walls. I tore it open, breathless. It was an invitation, an opportunity to partner with a luxury restaurant in the city. The words blurred, my eyes damp, but the meaning was crystalline. This was no longer survival. This was the beginning of power. An invitation arrives: partnership with a luxury restaurant. They thought I'd come in a taxi. They didn't expect me to own the night. The black marble facade of the Manhattan restaurant gleamed under soft amber light, polished cars pulling into the valet one after another. I stepped out quietly from the back of a rideshare, nothing flashy, nothing worth a photograph, and adjusted the plain navy dress I'd chosen on purpose. It wasn't that I couldn't afford couture, I simply wanted to see the disdain on their faces when they thought they had won. Inside, the air was heavy with the perfume of roses and truffle oil. The Brooks family sat clustered around a long table, laughter bouncing off crystal glasses. My sister Victoria's smile was dazzling, her gown sequined to catch every shard of light. The moment she spotted me, her lips curved into a smirk that sliced deeper than any knife. "Evelyn," she purred, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear, "I almost didn't recognize you. That dress looks affordable." I pulled my chair without replying, but the silence didn't save me. Jason Miller, the man who once promised me forever, raised his glass, eyes glinting with mockery. "Don't worry, Vic. If she can't cover her share, I'm sure the restaurant takes coupons." Laughter erupted around the table, the kind that suffocates, the kind that reminds you they consider you an outsider. Victoria leaned forward, her voice dripping with syrup and venom. "Birthdays aren't cheap, sister. Let me cover for you. Call it my gift." She tossed her hair, basking in the approval of Richard and Madeline. My father didn't even look at me. He swirled his wine, amused, as if watching a scene he'd written himself. I let them revel in it, my face unreadable, my hands calm in my lap, because I knew what was coming. Then Daniel Ruiz appeared. The manager's stride was smooth, his dark suit immaculate, his expression deferential in a way that shifted the entire energy of the room. He stopped at my side and inclined his head. "Miss Brooks," he said, his voice carrying over the laughter, "your black card was waiting in our vault. Allow me to return it to you personally." He extended the sleek card between his gloved fingers, his respect so visible that the table's mockery froze midair. Richard choked on his wine. The glass clinked hard against his teeth as he sputtered, the red staining his cuff. The silence that followed was heavier than the chandeliers above us. Daniel didn't miss a beat. "Your usual table is ready, Miss Brooks. The chef has prepared a menu to your liking." Every gaze turned to me, some wide with confusion, others tight with fury. Victoria's smirk fractured. Jason's hand trembled against his glass. My mother's knuckles whitened as she gripped her napkin. I lifted my eyes, let the pause stretch until it pressed against their chests, and then I smiled faintly. "Let's have the real celebration, shall we?" Silence is the loudest sound when every pair of eyes cuts into you. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. The flicker of candle flames stretched shadows across polished silver, and all I could feel was the weight of their gaze. For the first time in years, they weren't laughing, not at me, not at anyone. They were simply staring, as though I had committed some unholy crime by placing that little rectangle of power on the table. My father was the first to break. His voice, rough and brittle, cracked the hush. "How did you get that card?" He leaned forward, knuckles pressed against the linen, eyes dark with something between disbelief and rage. He had never questioned his own control before. Tonight, for the first time, he did. Victoria's laugh cut through his words, high-pitched and brittle. "Please," she scoffed, tossing her curls. She probably borrowed it. Maybe the manager felt sorry for her, let her play pretend. She bit into a strawberry from her plate with exaggerated leisure, but her hands betrayed her fingers, trembling ever so slightly as the fork scraped porcelain. Jason leaned in next, his tone a parody of warmth. "Evelyn, you don't have to put on a show for them. You can tell me the truth." His hand brushed mine under the table, the same hand that once wrote me promises in ink-stained notes. "If you're struggling, I'll understand." His eyes gleamed with curiosity, not compassion, like a vulture circling what it hoped was still weak prey. I drew a slow breath, let the silence stretch again, then placed the card back into Daniel's gloved hand. His posture remained respectful, his gaze fixed only on me, as though no other Brooks existed. That deference was louder than any defense I could have offered. I leaned forward, my voice quiet but sharp enough to slice the air. "The poor don't have this card," I said, holding Richard's stare. Then, without breaking eye contact, I tilted my chin toward Victoria. "But neither do the fake rich." The color drained from her face. Jason's smirk faltered. Even my mother, stone-cold Madeline, let her fork slip against the china with a sharp clang. Around us, other diners pretended not to notice, but their ears stretched toward every word, their glances darting back and forth. I could feel the shift in the air, the first fracture in their illusion of superiority. Richard slammed his palm against the table. "You dare!" But his voice broke under the weight of too many watching eyes. His empire had always thrived in private, behind boardroom doors and family gates. Here, in public, he had no control over the narrative. That power was mine now. Daniel inclined his head toward me, calm as ever, as though he had navigated storms like this countless times. "Miss Brooks," he said smoothly, "if you'd prefer, we can move you to your private VIP suite upstairs. The chef has prepared it with your usual preferences." His tone was soft, but his words were a hammer, striking at the core of their disbelief. Not only did I belong here, but I had been here before so many times they hadn't even noticed. I let the offer hang in the air, watching Victoria's lips part in outrage, Jason's brows knit in suspicion, and my father's jaw clench so tightly it might shatter. Finally, I smiled, slow and deliberate. "No," I said, my voice carrying enough steel to silence the room again. "I'll stay right here, in plain sight. Rumors once buried me. Tonight, I'll dig them up for everyone to see." The golden glow of the chandeliers flickered across the polished wine glasses, but the warmth didn't reach the table. Every eye still lingered on me, darting between disbelief and outrage. My family had always thrived on whispers, those tiny, poisonous threads woven in the dark. Tonight, I was going to unravel them, strand by strand. I lifted my glass slowly, swirling the red liquid as though I had all the time in the world. "Do you remember college, Victoria?" I asked, my tone light, conversational like discussing weather. Of course you do. You made sure no one forgot me either. Her smile faltered, the edge of her lips twitching. What are you talking about? The memory cut through me as clearly as if I were still there. The fraternity dinner, music pounding, laughter spilling through expensive halls. I had walked in on Jason's arm, hopeful, nervous, trying to believe I belonged. Then came the first Snickers whispers that I was drowning in debt, that I begged professors for pity, that I clung to Jason only for his connections. Victoria had stood in the corner, glass in hand, whispering to a circle of wide-eyed girls. Her voice, dripping with venom, carried across the room. She can't even pay her tuition without begging Daddy. Pathetic, really. Back then, Jason only laughed louder, playing along. Don't worry, he had said to his friends, smirking. I'll cover her meal tonight, not sure about the rest of her bills. The laughter had been sharp, merciless, filling my ears until I could hardly breathe. I snapped back to the present, my gaze locked on Jason's pale face. You thought I'd forget? I asked quietly. I remember every laugh, every word. You, mocking me in front of strangers. You, Victoria, weaving lies into every ear until people believed them as truth. And Mother? I turned my gaze to Madeline. You sat silent, nodding behind closed doors, agreeing I was unworthy. The silence that fell over the table now was thicker than any roar of laughter from the past. My words carried farther than their gossip ever had. Guests at nearby tables stilled, forks halfway to their mouths, eavesdropping with blatant hunger. Victoria scoffed, though her voice cracked. That was years ago, Evelyn. Don't be so dramatic. I set my glass down sharply, the sound ringing like a gavel. Years ago, you tried to bury me under shame. But I learned something. I let my gaze sweep the table, catching each of them in turn. You called me poor. But poverty isn't about money. It's about lacking decency. The words landed like stones dropped in a still pond, ripples crashing outward. Victoria flushed crimson, Jason shifted in his seat, and Richard's jaw twitched as if he might finally unleash the tirade he had been holding back. But it was my mother who moved first. Her hand clenched her wineglass so tightly that the stem gave way with a sharp crack. Red wine spilled across the white tablecloth, spreading like blood. Her voice, low and icy, cut through the gasps. Evelyn, she hissed, eyes blazing. Stop this now. They thought it was a prop. I made them test it. The dinner plates had arrived, delicate towers of seared lamb and truffle-scented puree, but no one at the Brooks table was eating. Forks hovered, knives pressed into meat without slicing. All eyes kept circling back to the slim black rectangle that rested beside my wineglass. It lay there like an uninvited guest, daring them to acknowledge its presence. Richard finally leaned back, his chuckle a low growl in his chest. Anyone can wave a piece of plastic, he said, lifting his glass. These things are vanity toys, useless if there's nothing behind them. His words, soaked in arrogance, echoed the same disdain he had poured over me since childhood. Victoria smirked, pouncing on the opening. She pushed her plate forward with a sharp scrape. Go on, Evelyn. Swipe it. Let's see what happens when the machine laughs back at you. Her voice rose just enough for the nearby tables to catch, their conversations faltering as ears tilted toward us. She wanted spectacle. She had always wanted my humiliation performed before an audience. I didn't flinch. Instead, I lifted the card between two fingers and tapped it against the linen, the black surface catching the golden light. Daniel, I said evenly, turning my gaze to the manager who had stood patiently nearby, would you assist us? His expression betrayed nothing but professional composure. He bowed slightly, accepting the card with the same reverence he would a crown jewel. The room seemed to shrink, the clinking of cutlery and hum of chatter dimming to silence as he walked toward the register. Even the servers paused mid-step, balancing trays of champagne flutes. Victoria leaned forward, her smile venomous. Any second now, we'll see the truth. Jason chuckled softly beside her, though his eyes darted nervously toward the counter. He leaned close enough for only me to hear. You don't have to do this. It's fine if you admit it's borrowed. I'll cover you. His words dripped with false sympathy, the same syrupy poison he had once used to excuse betrayal. The register's screen lit up with a single, unmistakable word. Approved. The server holding the receipt looked confused for only a moment before printing it and handing it to Daniel. He returned with calm precision, placing both the card and slip before me. Transaction approved without limit, Miss Brooks. The hush that followed was heavier than thunder. My father's face darkened to a shade I had only ever seen in boardrooms when a deal collapsed. Victoria's mouth hung open, the smirk erased as though scrubbed away. Even my mother's poise cracked, her fingers tightening against her napkin until her knuckles whitened. I slid the card back into its place, my smile faint but razor sharp. Authenticity doesn't ask for permission. The words cut clean through the air, final and undeniable. Around us, I sensed the shift diners stealing glances, servers whispering behind trays, the room bending to the truth they could no longer deny. Jason broke first. His chair screeched back an inch as he leaned forward, words tumbling out faster than his mind could measure. Evelyn, I could manage your finances if you're overwhelmed. You've come so far and I know how complicated it can be. In every web, the spider believes it's invisible until the strands glisten in the light. The restaurant's hush had deepened into something electric. Guests weren't just watching us now, they were invested. Their forks abandoned, their eyes flicking between me and the people who once thought they could erase me. Gossip had always been their strongest weapon, but gossip only thrives when hidden in shadows. Tonight, every word sparkled beneath the light. Jason leaned toward me, his voice smooth, calculated, as if he could rewrite history with enough charm. Evelyn, he said softly, you've grown stronger. I can see it. Back then, I chose stability. I needed something certain, someone who had a future mapped out. You have to understand that. His hand twitched toward mine before retreating, as though the table itself had burned him. I stared at him, letting silence press until sweat pooled at his collar. Stability? I repeated, each syllable precise. My gaze swept the table, finally landing on Victoria, who sat stiffly, lips curled in a brittle smile. Is that what you called it when you traded me for her? The air caught. Jason flinched, but the trap had already sprung. His words spilled before he could stop them. It wasn't personal, he muttered. Victoria. She had the money, the family name. I couldn't risk. The moment froze like a frame in glass. Murmurs spread from table to table, incredulous gasps blending with hushed laughter. Diners exchanged glances, shaking their heads, some whispering just loud enough. For her money? Did you hear? The web had been exposed, the strands glittering, undeniable. Victoria's eyes blazed, her fork clattering against porcelain. Jason, she hissed, her voice slicing through the whispers. You don't need to explain yourself to her. But he had already explained everything. I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hand, my smile cold. So that's the truth. You didn't leave me because I was unworthy. You left because I had nothing you could leech off. And when you found Victoria, I let the pause linger like poison. You latched on because you finally sniffed out a bank account to tether yourself to. His face paled, eyes darting between me and the onlookers whose judgment now weighed heavier than any debt he had once mocked me for. I tilted my head, voice cutting like glass. Funny how trash always finds each other. The laughter that followed didn't come from me. It came from the crowd's suppressed chuckles, sharp intakes of breath, the quiet cruelty of strangers reveling in another's disgrace. Jason slumped back, shoulders collapsing inward. Victoria seethed beside him, but her fury only highlighted her complicity. Her silence now an admission more damning than words. I didn't give them time to recover. Turning toward Daniel, who had been watching with quiet loyalty, I lifted my glass in signal. Bring the reserve champagne, I said, my voice carrying across the hushed restaurant. The one for the real host. They thought I was a guest. This was my house all along. The restaurant's golden light shimmered against the glass walls, but I could feel the air tightening, the weight of my family's disbelief pressing in like smoke. My father's glare had hardened into something dangerous. My mother's silence a blade poised to cut. Victoria's brittle poise on the edge of shattering. Jason simply drowned in his own shame, his gaze fixed anywhere but me. Daniel Ruiz stepped closer, his hands clasped with the calm assurance of a man used to unveiling truths. Miss Brooks, he said, bowing slightly, your investor file and reserved suite are prepared. Would you like us to transition the party now? The table stilled, every word dragging sharp across the linen. Richard slammed his palm flat against the table, rattling silverware. Investor file? What are you talking about? His voice thundered, filling the restaurant like a gavel. Heads turned, whispers swirled. Daniel didn't flinch. His smile was courteous but unyielding. Perhaps I wasn't clear earlier. Miss Brooks is not merely our honored guest. She is the strategic shareholder, The reason this flagship restaurant still stands after last year's downturn. Without her, tonight would be nothing but a shuttered dining hall. The silence that followed was louder than any outburst. Madeline's hand froze midway to her glass. Victoria's breath caught, audible even across the table. Jason blinked hard, as if willing himself awake from a nightmare. I let them stew in it, sipping my wine, savoring the bitter tang on my tongue. Then, I raised my glass high enough for the chandeliers to catch, my voice steady, unshaken. "Welcome, everyone," I said, letting the words spread like wildfire. "To my table." Gasps rippled through the room. Sophia Lane, seated discreetly among the high-profile guests, leaned forward, her pen already scratching against her notebook. A journalist's eyes never missed blood in the water, and tonight there was plenty. Richard's jaw tightened, veins pulsing at his temple. He looked between Daniel and me as though betrayed by the entire fabric of reality. "You can't possibly," he started, but his voice faltered when he saw Daniel nod solemnly in confirmation. And then Victoria snapped. The mask cracked. She slammed her hand against the table, the sharp report ringing out like a gunshot. Dishes rattled. Wine spilled across white linen in a crimson bloom. Her voice, shrill with rage, tore through the room. "Lies! She's still nothing!" The chandeliers glowed like a courtroom spotlight, and the table became my witness stand. The laughter and clinking glasses from nearby tables had faded into uneasy murmurs. Waiters hovered at the periphery, unsure whether to serve or retreat. Every eye in the hall, from the high-profile guests to Sophia Lane's watchful pen, focused squarely on me. My family's dinner had transformed into something far heavier, something none of them could control. Richard leaned forward, knuckles whitening against the polished wood, his voice a thunderous demand. "Where did the money come from?" His tone wasn't curiosity, it was accusation, the kind he'd used when scolding subordinates who failed him. Victoria leaned back, her smile sharp and venomous. "Scams, maybe," she said, tilting her head, letting her earrings catch the light as though mocking me with their brilliance. "Or dumb luck. That's the only explanation. People like you don't build empires, Evelyn." Jason's eyes flickered between them and me, beads of sweat forming at his temple. His lips parted, but no words came. He was waiting, hoping someone else would burn first. I slid my hand beneath the table, fingers brushing the folder I had kept tucked away, a folder that weighed more than its paper ever could. Slowly, deliberately, I set it down, the sound of cardboard against linen cutting through the silence. "Forbes features," I said, opening the file and placing glossy pages onto the table. Photographs of me shaking hands with investors, headlines calling me the quiet disruptor of farm-to-table dining. Investor contracts. I fanned out documents bearing signatures recognizable to anyone who had ever dabbled in New York business. Financial statements, records of ventures you all dismissed as pipe dreams. Richard's jaw clenched, his hand curling tighter, but his silence betrayed more than his words ever could. Madeline shifted uncomfortably, her glass trembling slightly as she lifted it to her lips. Finally, I reached the page I had held back, the one that cut deepest. I smoothed the creases, turned it for them to see. The Brooks family letterhead, the cold formality of legal jargon. "Your official email," I said, my voice steady, though I could feel the weight of years pressing against every syllable. "7 years ago, you erased me from the will. You stripped me of my seat, my name, my worth in your eyes." I tapped the printed page with my finger. "Here is your erasure, in black and white. The same erasure that became my fire." The paper lay between us like a weapon, undeniable. Sophia's pen flew faster across her notebook, her brow furrowed, sensing the bloodline fracture splintering before her. Richard swallowed hard, the sound almost audible. Victoria laughed, brittle and hollow. "Documents mean nothing. You could have forged them." "Forged?" Daniel Ruiz cut in smoothly, his tone a dagger cloaked in velvet. "I can personally confirm Miss Brooks's portfolio. Every word you see is fact. Without her investments, this establishment would be closed." The room gasped softly. Jason's shoulders sagged, his facade collapsing. He whispered, barely audible, his voice trembling with reluctant awe. "God, she's telling the truth." When a storm peaks, it rips the mask off everything. The hall pulsed with silence, the kind that carries more weight than sound. Forks lay abandoned on half-finished plates, wine glasses untouched. Guests who had once come for a meal now leaned forward as if attending a trial that history itself would cite. Chandeliers above cast a harsh, theatrical glow that made no one comfortable. Sophia Lane's pen scratched furiously across her notepad. Every stroke a promise that this night would not stay buried. I straightened my shoulders, the folder still open before me. "You asked where the money came from," I said, my voice calm, but cutting through the room like glass. "It came from every hour I worked when you turned your backs. It came from the markets where I hauled crates at dawn, from the diners who trusted my recipes, from every handshake in rooms you thought I'd never be invited into. I built an empire in silence, funded not by privilege, but by grit." Jason shifted uneasily, his gaze fixed on his plate as though it might shield him. Richard opened his mouth, but Daniel Ruiz moved before he could, stepping forward with a measured grace that carried authority. "What Miss Brooks says is not just truth," Daniel announced, his voice carrying. "She is this establishment's strategic shareholder. When others hesitated, she funded us, stabilized us, saved us. Without her, the Brooks name would have nothing to dine in tonight." The gasp from the audience rippled like a physical wave. Richard's face reddened with humiliation. Madeline's fingers dug into the stem of her wineglass, as if holding it could hold back reality. Victoria's smirk faltered for the first time, her eyes darting left and right, hunting for a way out that didn't exist. Sophia Lane rose suddenly, her notebook clutched to her chest. "Miss Brooks," she said, voice steady but edged with excitement. "For the record, please confirm the names. Your father, Richard Brooks. Your mother, Madeline Brooks. Your sister, Victoria Brooks. Your former fiancé, Jason Miller. All present tonight, all witnesses to this." Her words etched the night into permanence. I gave a single nod. "All present," I replied, my tone deliberately measured, "and all complicit." The tension snapped. Victoria's chair screeched back as she sprang up, her composure finally crumbling. Her voice cracked into a shriek that rang against the marble walls. "I deserve the inheritance, not her. I was the chosen one, the face of this family. Everything was supposed to be mine." Her words echoed through the stunned hall, every guest hearing the naked confession of greed and entitlement. Even Jason flinched at the rawness of it, as if embarrassed by the spectacle. Richard's jaw fell open, but no defense came. Madeline's glass broke in her grip, shards falling onto the tablecloth like the splinters of their reputation. I let the silence draw out, savoring the moment when the storm revealed its truth. Then I met Victoria's furious eyes, my own voice colder than the wine chilling on the table. "You never deserved anything tonight. Everyone sees it. Queens don't fall with grace. They collapse with noise." The restaurant had become a theater, and Victoria stood at the center of it, trembling in a gown meant to crown her as untouchable. Instead, the silk shimmered under the chandeliers like a costume exposed. Guests no longer pretended to avert their eyes, phones slipped discreetly from clutches, cameras angled low but steady, recording what would live far longer than this dinner. Waitstaff froze with trays halfway lifted, not daring to break the silence that pressed on the air. Jason broke it first. His voice cracked, louder than he meant it to be. "I needed wealth, not dreams," he blurted, as if confessing to a crime he thought minor but knew was fatal. His face paled immediately, realizing too late that the words carried across every corner of the room. A collective gasp surged from the tables, followed by low, sharp whispers. Some laughed bitterly, others simply stared. Jason's polished image, the charming fiancé who had once stood at my side, collapsed in the space between syllables. Victoria's eyes widened at him in disbelief, before whipping back to me, her fury spilling like venom. "You think this makes you better? You think dragging us down lifts you up?" Her voice pitched higher with each word, shrill against the weight of the moment. "You'll always be nothing, Evelyn. A stray, a parasite." She lunged verbally, her insults flailing as though each one could stitch back her unraveling dignity. But no one came to shield her. Not Richard, stone-faced and defeated. Not Madeline, whose trembling hands clutched at the broken stem of her glass. Not Jason, who had already betrayed himself beyond salvage. She stood utterly alone, abandoned by the family name she wielded like armor all her life. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. My words sliced sharper for their restraint. "Riches can buy dresses, not dignity. And you're bankrupt." Her breath caught, a strangled sound escaping her throat as though I had slapped her across the room. The guests murmured louder, phones capturing her collapse in high definition. Some shook their heads in pity, others in grim satisfaction. Victoria's lips parted as if to scream again, but the weight of the eyes on her silenced her more effectively than I ever could. She sat back down hard, her crown shattered before it had ever been placed. The hall no longer buzzed with disbelief. It hummed with verdict. And I was not the one on trial anymore. From the corner of my vision, I saw Madeline staring at me not with contempt this time, but with something raw, fragile, and wet. Her eyes brimmed with tears, sliding against the mask she had worn for years. She whispered, voice breaking like porcelain. "Evelyn, did we truly lose you forever?" An empire doesn't collapse in silence, it groans before it breaks. The dining hall had lost its polish. Silver cutlery clattered out of rhythm. Conversations dropped to uneasy murmurs, and the chandelier light seemed harsher now, catching every flaw in the Brooks family like cracks in porcelain. What had begun as a birthday dinner was ending as a public autopsy. Guests leaned close to one another, their whispers carrying like jurors deliberating over a sentence that everyone already knew. Richard tried to salvage what remained. His hands, once steady from decades of control, now fidgeted with the stem of his glass. His voice wavered between command and desperation. "Evelyn," he said, forcing calm, "perhaps we acted too hastily in the past. You've proven yourself capable, more than capable. The Brooks Group could use your expertise. I can offer you a seat on the board, a place back in the fold, where you belong." The words hung in the air, brittle, almost pathetic. I felt every eye on me, waiting to see if I would bend if the daughter once discarded would clutch at the table that had banished her. My lips curved, but not in gratitude. "I don't need your boardroom," I said evenly. "I have my own," gasps echoed, soft but unmistakable. A few guests nodded subtly, their judgment no longer hidden. Sophia Lane, pen racing across her pad, underlined something with a flourish. I caught the gleam in her eye. Tomorrow's headline was already being written. Richard's jaw tightened, fury leaking into his eyes even as he forced a faint, brittle smile. "Think carefully. Legacy is not something you can purchase, it's born into you." I rose from my chair slowly, deliberately. The motion itself commanded the room, drawing silence back like a tide. My voice carried, firm and unyielding. "From tonight, I am no longer the erased daughter. I am the one who writes the terms." The declaration rang through the hall, final and resonant. Some guests stood quietly, adjusting coats, shaking their heads as they moved toward the exit. Their glances told the story without words. The Brooks name, once untouchable, now lay in shambles. Madeline closed her eyes, her face pale, lips pressed thin as if holding back more tears. Jason shifted awkwardly, trying to shrink into the background. But it was Victoria who broke the fragile stillness, her voice cracking into a scream that echoed against the marble walls. "Without us, you're nothing!" Her words fell heavy, desperate, clinging to a past that had just crumbled into dust. They once erased me. Tonight, I erased their power over me. The dining hall that had pulsed with noise now sat in near silence. Chandeliers still glimmered above, but their glow fell on slumped shoulders and half-drained glasses. Waitstaff cleared plates quietly, careful not to intrude upon the wreckage of pride that lay scattered across the Brooks family table. The empire that once dictated my worth had dwindled to whispers and lowered eyes. Richard, for the first time in my memory, looked small. His frame bent slightly, as though the weight of a crumbling legacy pressed down on him. He toyed with his cufflink, eyes darting anywhere but toward me. Madeline's posture, once sculpted in steel, softened into something brittle. She reached for her glass but found it empty, fingers trembling as she set it back on the linen. And Victoria, who once relished every chance to remind me of my supposed insignificance, sat rigid, her lips tight, her eyes glassy with rage she could no longer wield. I breathed slowly, the air cooler now, freer. Their silence was not enough. Justice was never silence, it was acknowledgement. "Here are my terms," I said, voice steady. "No more mockery, no more leeching off my success, and no more trying to display me as some trophy daughter whenever it suits you. If I exist in your world again, it will be on my own conditions, not yours." Richard swallowed, the sound harsh in the hush of the room. He nodded once, stiff, as though the gesture cost him something he had never given before. Madeline's lips parted, a whisper escaping, but it wasn't apology, it was exhaustion. Victoria said nothing, her jaw clenched so tightly that words seemed impossible. Jason had already disappeared, his chair pushed back, his shadow swallowed into the Manhattan night without even a goodbye. The absence felt right. Jason had always been a void dressed in promises. Now he was gone, like smoke dispersing. Daniel Ruiz stepped forward. unobtrusive yet unshakable. He didn't bow this time. He simply met my eyes with the quiet respect of someone who had always known. "Whenever you're ready, Miss Brooks," he murmured, offering me the dignity of closure without spectacle. I pushed my chair back, the scrape of wood against marble louder than any words my family could muster. My gaze swept the table one last time, the same table where I had once been invisible, mocked, erased. Tonight, I had written over that silence. "I didn't come for your approval," I said, each word slow, deliberate. "I came to prove I never needed it." No one interrupted. No one dared. Richard's eyes dropped to his lap. Madeline's hand tightened on her napkin. Victoria stared at the tablecloth as though it had betrayed her too. I turned, my heels striking against the polished floor, each step echoing finality. Daniel guided me toward the door, the golden lights behind us dimming as though bowing to the inevitable close. Outside, the air met me with a cool rush, carrying the scent of the city freedom, sharp and alive. Behind me, a voice carried through the doorway. Sophia Lane, pen in hand, called out softly, almost reverently, "Tomorrow's paper will remember this night forever." And I smiled, because for the first time, I didn't need anyone else to remember. I had written it into being myself. The night that began with scorn ended with silence, as the Brooks family's grandeur collapsed under the weight of truth. Justice had come slowly, but it had come completely, stripping away pride, betrayal, and every illusion of control. When injustice is met with unwavering courage, the final verdict can echo through a lifetime, proving that power built on lies cannot endure. Like a storm that clears the sky, the battle left behind not ruin, but freedom. Avi. If you found strength in Evelyn's fight, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and leave your thoughts below. Comment 1 if you felt her struggle deeply, or 2 if you think justice still left something missing.